Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. I want to welcome you back to another exciting segment of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. You know, in addition to having wonderful guests on my podcast, I sometimes will have rants where I will talk explicitly about an experience that I've had, typically around race. And then I'll have another segment that's called Reflections, where I'm not necessarily mad about something, but I'm just thinking deeply about things and their impact upon me in the world. I'm introducing another segment today, so your feedback is going to be very helpful in helping me to determine whether or not this segment will return. But I'm calling it storytelling. It's a big part of what I do as a preacher and as a communicator. And I realize that during my interviews, I might digress a bit and tell a story in order to make a point, but I rarely make the point by telling the story. What I mean is the story usually feeds the point that I'm making with the guest, rather than just having the story be the point in itself. So today I'm trying something where I'm allowing the story to be the point. And I want to talk about how the concept of race and racial division was developed in and around me. One of my earliest memories of a kid was the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I consider myself a child of the 70s. I was born in 1963. I started elementary school in the 60s. So although I would consider myself, really having come of age in the 1970s, a lot of my consciousness was shaped in the 60s. It was a very different world. I'm 57. I was born in November of 1963. And I am my mother's first child. And I'm my mother's and father's first son. When I was born in November of 1963, the world was much different. For example, it was still illegal to be married cross-culturally in about 23. That's roughly half of the states within the U.S. Think about that. Think about how many friends you have. Think about yourself, how many people you know who are married cross-culturally, who have adopted cross-culturally. It was still illegal in 23 states when I was born. Also, when I was born in November of 1963, the March on Washington was only about 70 days old. We talk about it with great admiration of those who organized it. We reflect upon it in black and white footage, typically in February during Black History Month. It was still very fresh in people's minds. It was nearer to people than New Year's Day is to us as we're listening to this in early June of 2021. So I just want to set that context. I can remember living in a third-story apartment building on the west side of Chicago. We lived at the intersection of Hamlin and Wilcox, if you know the west side of Chicago, in the Garfield Park area. And we lived right across the street from the shelter. It was a beautiful place. It was actually at that shelter when it would flood in the winters where my mom taught me how to ice skate. I was introduced to the concept of double blades, and we learned to enjoy snow. I remember the blizzard of 1967 that happened in Chicago. These things shaped my consciousness. But when King was assassinated, we lived just a few blocks south of Madison. We could see the flames licking the skies in tall buildings from our apartment because, it was a third-story building and it had high ceilings, 13-foot ceilings. And so it was high. And I can remember that. I can remember my mother saying, get down, because people were shooting. They were looting. My mother had a white coworker and they were driving home and she was watching white drivers being pulled out of their cars and beaten. And she was just praying to get home, praying to get home, praying to get home. And our lights went out. I remember there was a blackout because of all the chaos. And I just remember the noise and the energy. And I sensed a level of fear that was more than just there's a mouse in the house. We spilled some hot water. Someone cut their leg on a piece of wire and quick, get the Band-Aids, quick, get the Bactine. As I talk about it, it was palpable. It was almost as if you could scoop it with an ice cream scoop. It was that thick. It was a very fearful time. Now, in addition to all of that, I remember having air raid drills in school. My daughter has no idea what that is. I don't even know if my daughter did fire drills, but we did air raid drills in case the Russians dropped the bomb on us. We would have to practice getting under our desk or standing in the coat room against the wall so that we would live or outlive a bomb attack. And so starting Head Start, kindergarten, and first grade in the 60s on the west side of Chicago, it was just a frightening time for a kid who had no context for all of this. And his own world was probably the 2 blocks between my home and my school and maybe the quick expressway ride on the Eisenhower to Maywood to visit my grandmother. It was a very limited world. But within this storytelling episode, I want to talk about how the concept of race and the talk were introduced to me. So, explain to you my world in Chicago, my Head Start class, all black kids, and a black teacher. My very first formal educator was a black woman. Ironically, her name was Jackie. And about 20 years after that, I would marry a woman named Jackie. Jackie took us on tours to Goldblatt's and to the public library. And we got outside the school and explored our world and walked around. And I just thought that was very cool. I had a white teacher in kindergarten, but still an all black class. There was one white child out of about 35 black kids. I'll ask my engineer if we can attach a link to that photo. And then in first grade, Mrs. Turner, my favorite teacher, she's 101 and is still my pen pal. I moved from Chicago in 1970 because my mom wanted to come to Wisconsin to go to college. And Mrs. Turner, my first grade teacher, became my pen pal. She told me that I was going to be the first black president. She affirmed that I was going to be the first black president of the United States in 1969, 1970. And I loved her and love her dearly to this day. So we moved to Madison, about 150 miles from Chicago, completely different, very white. I mean, today, in 2021, Wisconsin is probably 5% non-white. At least that's the black population. It's about 5% of the state's population, but it's majority white. And so it was a different world coming into it. My neighbors were white. The postal workers were white. My teachers were white. Almost all my neighbors were white. We lived in a nice townhouse complex on the east side of Madison. And I only remember there being 2 black families. One of the families was the family that invited my mom to come to Madison and go back to school. They had been childhood friends. And so now these women in their early 30s with children had decided to return to college. And so it was a complete shift. Now, what was very interesting is that before we get to the point of the talk, Mom taught us, you're just as smart as anyone else. You're just as good as anyone else. And so we had no preconceived notion of white privilege, of white supremacy, of how white people see us or think about us. Just thinking, my mom was born in 1939. She was 30 at the time. She had watched the world change. She had been a sharecropper, as were her siblings and her parents in Missouri, until they came to Chicago in the late 50s. And so Mom had a realistic picture of what America was like. But I think she had hope that it was going someplace else. And one of the things that I want to say and just in recognition of all that black parents had to deal with in the late 60s and early 70s was that they hoped for a world that didn't involve the talk. They were given the talk because they lived in the South. I think they came to the North in places like Chicago and Madison and Milwaukee because the talk was not required, because the North was different and people felt differently, and students protested for equality. In 1970, the University of Wisconsin-Madison was having sit-ins. The students were demanding a Black Studies program, and it wasn't just the Black students. Black and white students demanded it. It is one of the first Black Studies departments in a major university that was demanded by the students, not the faculty, not the Board of Regents, not the tenure board, not the tenure committee, not the department chairs. The student bodies, the body demanded a Black Studies department. And so Mom had hoped that this was a world where her son would not have to have the talk. Well, I entered second grade in Madison, 1970. I'm 6 years old. I have a late birthday. And Mrs. Carls is my teacher. Very nice lady. Nice students. I make friends right away, even though everyone looks differently than they did in my world in Chicago. For whatever reason, I was able to make that transition fairly easily. And so was my sister, who started kindergarten. But I remember I don't remember Mrs. Carls talking about slavery. I have to be honest, I don't remember it. But I do remember the fact that I came home one day and I was looking sad. And I remember the way that my mother describes it is that the light had gone out of my eyes. She said, baby, I saw that a light had gone out in you, because I learned to read early. I learned to spell early. But my mom was like that. My mom started kindergarten being able to name each capital of each of the 50 states and spell them. Say what you want to about separate but equal schools. Say what you want to about Black one-room rural schools in southeast Missouri, as my grandmother would call it, Missouri. But my mother could name and spell every state capital in kindergarten. Now, just because my mom dropped out of high school freshman year didn't mean that she wasn't brilliant, because she was. That's why she ended up getting an undergraduate and a master's degree at Wisconsin with honors, even though she did not finish high school. So she made sure that I could read. I can remember driving down the street and pointing at street signs and saying, okay, pronounce that word. What is this? What is that? And so I came into school as a confident kid who could count to 100, and I could probably count by twos and by fives, but I could read and I could write my name. And so I came in with just really raring to go. And so school was not a place that I dreaded. But as a 6-year-old, this light had gone out. I didn't look confident. I didn't look like I was enjoying the process. And she knew something was wrong. And she wanted to make sure no one had done anything to hurt me. So she asked, honey, baby, what's wrong? And my reply was, were we really slaves, Mom? Now, the concept had deeply plagued me because I knew that I was Black. But I didn't know that I descended from Black people who were owned by white people. I didn't know that we were considered less than human, subhuman. It just was not a part of my reality. We didn't talk about it at Thanksgiving. I didn't get slave toys as a kid. We did not sing slave songs. We were deeply rooted in our Blackness, Black church, Black community. We were connected. But no one thought to tell me in my Black community that I had been a slave, because no one thought that was important for my development. No one thought that would help me, make me smarter, make me run faster, make me think better about my humanity. So Black people didn't tell me that. But a white teacher with an all-white class, except for me and Reggie, we were told that we were the descendants of slaves. Now, we didn't talk about the cruelty of slaveholders and what was going on in the hearts of slave owners, that they would treat people this way. But how do you get a light back that you lose at 6? What Mom saw was a loss of innocence. I didn't get up that day and put on my Garanimals. You have to be in your 50s to know what I'm talking about. It was a brand of clothing that Sears made, and you matched the animal tags, and that's how you knew you were matching. So you wouldn't go to school wearing a green top and orange pants or green, something like that. And so you matched the lions and the bears, and so and the Sears tough skin jeans and all of that stuff. I didn't get dressed that morning to go to school to lose my soul. And that was the beginning of the journey of understanding race, being introduced to the concept of race in Madison and in the world. And so, it's just Carl's taught us that. I can't tell you how long the unit went. I can't tell you how much we talked about it. But I can tell you this. My mom came home from work. She saw me playing in front of the house or outside, and she looked at my eyes, and she knew something was wrong. That's how parents who are in tune to their children do things. But I know for Black parents who couldn't be everywhere would often look at you in your eyes. Are you okay? Did anybody say anything to you? Did anybody touch you? Did anybody do anything to you? Like, we were always drilled. Like, we didn't know what it meant as a kid, but parents, they could read us. Now, I still remember this, and it's been 51 years. I think other people remember it too. Before I get to the talk happening, let me tell you something else that was happening around the same time. As I mentioned, this complex, it must have been 175 units in this complex. Huge. And not far away from us was a family of all girls. And I remember my cousins visiting from Chicago, so it must have been summer. We were not in school. So at this time, I must be 7. And the concept of girls came up, like, oh, girls are this and girls are that. And, right across the courtyard, there's an apartment with all girls, and they're kind of cute. And so I'm 7. I want to be like my cool older cousins. And so they're talking about, ooh, she's cute. Ooh, she's fine. I'm also introduced to the concept of fineness. And so one of the sisters who was my age was nice. Her name was Mindy. And we've been friends, but she's white. Her name was Mindy. And so I wanted to like girls too. I was 7. My cousins did. So I was trying to do this. Now, I don't know what Mindy's parents were thinking, because all of a sudden, it was like my 3 cousins that are visiting. And, and then with me, you have these 4 young Black boys who are trying to have these conversations. Nowadays, young people say trying to holler at someone, but talking to these young girls. My oldest cousin was probably 10. So we weren't doing things, but just talking about stuff. But I can remember Mindy saying to me, I like you. I wish there was a way you could paint your skin peach. I had no idea what Mindy was talking about. But why the hell do I still remember that phrase 51 years later? And she didn't say it with any malice. There was not a snarl on her face. Her nostrils weren't flaring. She just looked at me and just said, I like you. You're nice. I just wish there was a way that we could paint your skin peach. And I remember the first thing I thought was, paint flakes? Like, you can't put paint on skin. But then the second thing I thought was, is her skin peach? Like, I never thought about her skin color as being peach. I knew it wasn't the same as mine. I wasn't confused about that. But this child wanted me to paint my skin peach, because somehow that would just make things easier. We're 7 years old. Mindy and I had just finished the 2nd grade, and already someone's talking to her. Someone's talking to her. Being a child of the 60s, coming of age of the 70s, I remember Kick the Habit commercials. Most of you won't know what I'm talking about. Those of you in your 20s and 30s and 40s won't know. Those of you older will. There was an assumption, America was coming to the realization that the Surgeon General had determined that smoking leads to cancer. And so there were these commercials about kicking the habit. Like, you got to stop, kick the habit. Like, take your pack of cigarettes, crumple them up and kick them. But the sort of the subcontext of the commercials was that you would have a little kid watching his dad. It was almost like almost always the men that were smoking in the commercials that I remember. Like, the dad would, they'd be washing the car together, and the son's sudsing up the car the way the dad does, and then the dad scrubs the tires and the son would do it. Then the dad would light up, and then the son would kind of get a little stick and pretend like he's lighting up. And the subcontext was, your kids are going to watch you smoke, and they're going to smoke. And so this whole sense was that kids learn from you. Kids learn from you. Mindy learned this from someone. Now, I'm not saying her parents were mean and they were calling us names, but a 7-year-old doesn't just formulate that if we were the same color, this would not be problematic for us to like each other. There must have been lots of talk because these are little kids who are now hanging out. And we were ranging from 7 to 10. So you didn't just go run off by yourself and go blocks and blocks away. I'm sure the parents saw that their 4 daughters were hanging out and playing with these 4 black guys. That's 2. In the same year, I become good friends with a guy named John in my 2nd grade class, and we became best friends. I don't know how you gravitate towards friends in 2nd grade. I don't know how you choose that someone's your best friend, but I remember that John and I were best friends, and we enjoyed interacting. John was a doctor's kid. Now, also, what's interesting is that as a kid, you don't understand class either because you only see each other at school. And so you don't know what people drive or what their parents do. You don't know. Like, well, isn't everyone's parent a university student? Aren't we all doing the same things? And so I can remember that John invited me to his home to come over to hang out. I think school was out one day. We're going to have a play date. And I remember calling John, and I could never get him on the phone because he had a calling service because his dad was a doctor. And so when I would dial the number, someone would say, "Hello, Dr. John's office." And so as a kid, I always pictured that they had a receptionist that sat like in their living room answering their phones. And so I would say, "Can I talk to John?" And she would say, "All right, hang up and dial right back and I'll put you through." And I'd hang up, and then John's mom would pick up the phone and she'd call John to the phone. And so first of all, that was just an odd thing that I could never dial him directly. I didn't understand that doctors had these kinds of services. They don't now. People have, it's different now. And so we were going to get together and play. And John called me and said he had to cancel because his cleaning lady hadn't come. His mom said that and I remember just thinking, just the way he said, and my mom said the cleaning lady didn't come. So because the cleaning lady didn't come, we couldn't have company. Now, I don't know what triggered my mom, Miss Verline. I don't know that it's the fact that John canceled on her son or that he said the word cleaning lady, but something set mom off and we had the talk. So between the light going out in my eyes and between Mindy saying that she wished I could be painted peach and John canceling because the cleaning lady hadn't come, I remember mom trying to explain to me, "Honey, sometimes you'll have friends and their parents haven't seen you. And they have different feelings about people who look different. And sometimes it means you can't play together." It was such a foreign concept. I didn't know what the hell she was saying and talking about. And what the hell is a cleaning lady? And why can't I call him directly? Is it the cleaning lady that answers the phone? John was wealthy and lived in a beautiful area called Maple Bluff. And that's where our governor lives. The governor's mansion is there. I don't think that mom expected that when she moved to Madison, that not only would we be dealing with racial differences, but also economic difference. In my sister's class, she was friends with a young girl whose parents were, pharmacists. They owned a chain of pharmacies, or at least one. I think it might have been a chain. And so they would come to get my sister in like these Lincoln Town cars. And so mom was like, "Wait a minute. I got to prepare my kids for this world because they're not just dealing with white people. They're dealing with wealthy white people who might have black servants or cleaning ladies." I just think it freaked her out, and she had to have the talk with me.
This is Jesse Mopan, originally from Port Townsend, Washington, currently living in Madison, Wisconsin. I listen to Black Like Me because racism and white supremacy are very powerful forces at work in our society today. which I'll never understand through my own lived experience as a white person. I feel like it's important to support you so that you don't have to rely on corporate donors and you can stay true to your message. And I heard about you through word of mouth. Thanks, and keep it up.
Now in its 5th season, the award-winning Black Like Me podcast has a reach throughout the U.S. and over 100 countries around the world. This amazing team of people here in Madison, Wisconsin are dedicated to changing the conversation surrounding race. When you sign up to support Black Like Me as a patron, you support the creation of better quality content and a better society. You help to plant the seeds for a different and better tomorrow. By going to patreon.com/blacklikeme and signing up at any of the levels offered, you are not only signing up to make a monthly donation, you are also joining a growing community of people interested in engaging the issue of race with a raw, unprecedented honesty. As a patron of the podcast, you will have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, and video chats with Dr. G. You will also have a chance to join the conversation that other patrons are already having with Dr. G about race in America. To become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/blacklikeme or see the link in our show notes. And for as little as $2 a month, you can support these important conversations and the work that Dr. G is doing.
That talk didn't prepare me for John because John's cleaning lady did come. I did go to I don't know if it's a sleepover, but I did go to hang out at John's house. We swam together at the Maple Bluff Country Club. I didn't feel unsafe. I didn't feel gawked at. I didn't feel picked on. In fact, when we moved from that side of town, John still came to my birthday party the following year. We've got video footage, Super 8 footage, someplace of John getting down, dancing at my birthday party. I'm dancing to Jackson 5 and Motown. And as an adult, when John's dad passed away, John's mom asked me to eulogize him. I eulogized that doctor. And so the things that mom had feared were not the case with John's family. But mom did not want me to walk into this uncertainty where I thought that I could be friends with someone and there might be extenuating circumstances that might not allow that to happen. That's the fear of a black parent, particularly in the early 70s, that they hope what had been their reality would not be their child's reality. That hope that you don't cross the street when someone white is coming, that you don't look people in the eye, that you're not the same, you let them order first. She had hoped that she would not have to have that talk. But she did. And I remember it. It was so interesting is I now know what she was trying to say. But it was as confusing to me as trying to explain where babies came from. It was that level of confusion. And you don't typically have that talk when you're 6 or 7. So between Mrs. Carl's teaching us that I was a slave or descendant of a slave, and Mindy wanting me to paint myself peach, and she was very sincere in that. She was not being mean. And John's cancellation of our initial play date, we had the first talk about race. I think about the next time it really came up was when we moved to another side of town and we lived on a cul-de-sac. And basically, it was predominantly white cul-de-sac, but this was in Maple Bluff. And these weren't the children of doctors and pharmaceutical moguls. I was introduced to a concept of poor whites. These white people used the N-word, and so did their children. And so the tension, and I can still remember the families gathering in a cul-de-sac and looking towards our house and talking. I mean, what a thing to remember as a 7 or 8-year-old. We moved there when I was in 3rd grade. And them just standing out in the cul-de-sac looking at our house. I know this feels like an episode of I can't remember the name. It was the Housewives show. They lived on the cul-de-sac. It was just weird. You could, and the parents would talk to their children, and the children were too young to know what and how to use the N-word. and how they would pick on us and call us names. Now I have to help you to understand. My mother had not yet found faith, and I don't think faith would have changed this in her. But if somebody called you the N-word or put their hands on you, you do the best to knock the shit out of them. That's how I was raised. You don't let somebody walk up to you calling you this because we fought too hard. We've come too far. We're not going to be ashamed of who we are. We live here just like they do. We got a house just like they do. We've got a yard which is larger than theirs. Nope. You're going to go outside and play, and nobody's going to do anything to you. You're going to come home from school and go to school, and nobody's going to touch you, look at you, or say anything crazy. But I just remember living in that area and the stress. And they were not like my friend John, and they were not like my sister's friend Jennifer. They were not picking us up for play dates, and they were not inviting us to birthday parties. But just that pressure of not just having someone wishing that you were painted peach, but just treating you with disdain. And it's the first time I felt the racial difference. Even as I'm talking about it now, I'm just remembering, stay out of my yard. Like if you're playing you're playing kickball and the ball goes over the fence, or you have to run and get it quickly because someone would come out the back door. Get out of my yard. What are you doing in my yard? Get away from my yard. It's just, damn, I forgot about some of that stuff as a kid. And this is at home. This is not at school. This is at home. And so mom had to explain the concept of poor whites. That these folks aren't faring well in their own white culture. So they consider you to be a threat because you're smart and you're sharp and you're fast and you're good looking and you're going someplace, and they're not. Now, I don't advise people to necessarily say to their children everything that my mom said to me about this, but she was a black woman in her early 30s who had a chip on her shoulder and had to hold her own. And she was from the west side of Chicago, and she wasn't going to take none of their shit. We're not going to be here in the 1970s, and you're going to be calling my kid the N-word. This is not Missouri, and we're not picking cotton, and you're not going to act like this towards us. And I felt like mom was able to make that very clear in the community, but we felt the tension. And here's the thing that's really interesting, folks. Here's the thing. Wait, let me stay in storytelling mode. I'm sorry. I'm so used to going to teachable mode. Let me stay in the storytelling mode. What I learned was that the children did not have the capacity to hold all the angst and the evil of their parents. And they would just want to be kids and ice skate and sled and catch lightning bugs and play tag. We called it it. You're it. That's what they would want to do. And then the parents would come home. They drive down the hill, and then things will change. And you go back to your own yard, and you pretend like you don't know each other. It's wild. It makes me think about that scene in 42, the story about Jackie Robinson. And I think we talked about this a few weeks ago, where the son is just cheering on this great athlete, but then he hears his dad using the N-word, and then all of a sudden the boy he gets this snarl on his face. Yeah, you blankety blank, and starts yelling it too. Almost, and then looking at his dad, almost looking for an attaboy or an accolade. These kids would literally play when their parents weren't home and then act like they didn't know us when their parents would get home. What are you doing over there in their yard? What are you doing over there? Get back in your own yard. That's what they would say to their children. Get back over here in your own yard. And so even when we didn't understand it and didn't want to stay in that weird space because we were in gym and art and music and learning Christmas carols and being in plays together and learning how to work with clay, and then we'd have to come home and pretend like we didn't know each other when we were friends at school. So that was talk number 2. When people feel threatened by you, when their stagnation is met by your upward mobility, they're going to call you names and treat you like you're garbage. But you need to know you are not garbage. I love that my mom built that into me. I love that she built that into us. I think the next talk came about 10 years later when I was in high school. I was a nice kid, likable. I was on homecoming court. It's the only black person on homecoming court. My senior year, I was the track captain of our track team. Got other awards and citations for tutoring and stuff. So I was a likable kid, and looking forward to college. I wanted to run track in a small college or small university, and many of the girls who found me attractive were white. I'm not saying that the black girls didn't, but the preponderance of the girls who liked me, and it was majority white school, were white. Now, this is the early 80s. And so people are a little bit more open to stuff. But I can remember my mother and my aunt, because my cousin John and I are just a few months apart, and we were preparing to go off to college. I remember being told, we come out of a deep history. Black men used to be killed when white women were attracted to them, would hit on them, or if they would hit on white women, they would talk about things like Emmett Till and what happens when you mix the races. And I clearly remember the talk. Now, this was just suggested to me, but this was said clearly to my cousin John, because he was going away to college. He was going to a small school, and he was told, don't you go away to college and come back here with a white woman. I think they said with no white woman. Don't you go away to college and come back with no white woman. And we kind of laughed because it just sounded like it's just a funny concept to say, but as black women, they were serious. Because one, it meant they had to give us the talk. If her family finds out that you're black, her father could be part of a mob. Her father could be a police officer. Her father could be a judge, and they can come after you and retaliate. And we can't protect you when you're doing that. It's enough danger being in the world and being black and male. Do not complicate this stuff by going and bringing no white girl home. That was like just the instruction. And the thought was, I know I had a cousin, an older cousin, who went away to college, met and married someone white, and we really never saw him again. And so there probably was a feeling in our family that when you marry white, you don't come home anymore. Because my cousin's wife had most likely not, and he was in college in the early 70s. Probably hadn't been around black people, not a lot of them, certainly not majority of black people, certainly not for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so if I saw his wife on the street, I would know her. If I saw my cousins, his children on the street, I would know them. When my uncle, his father died, his wife nor his daughters came with him to the funeral. Like it was as if he disappeared, and they had him all the time. But because he was with them, we hardly ever saw him. And when we did, typically at a funeral, we never saw the family. We used to see his wife, just a couple of times, but not a lot, because they could live in a world where she did not have to be in a majority black context. Now, I didn't know her or know her well, so I'm not trying to say that this is anything that she said, but I just think of the timing. They met in the 70s, and he just disappeared. You won't find him in photos. You won't find him at the cousins gatherings and reunions. You won't find that. And of course, everybody's busy, or, we got soccer, or, the wife has a work thing. We have a conflict. We can't make it to the holidays. But I know this, the black women in our family were watching, and they said, all right, when you black men go away to school and become successful, and then you get a white woman, so you don't come to family stuff anymore, and you forget you black, what, you embarrassed that you black, so you need someone that don't look like your mama. So we had to talk. Now that talk I remember, because I wasn't 6, I was 16. And, but they tied it to history, and they tied it to value, and they tied it to the community. Now, I believe that there was a strong sense of you honor love, but I also think they felt that you don't flirt with danger. And you may not help who you can fall in love with, but you can certainly help who you hang out with. But again, in trying to protect their sons, the way mom tried to protect me from being uninvited, what she thought was being uninvited to a party, it was trying to help their sons navigate a world and to make sure that there were black men for the black daughters, for the black women in the world. They put it down hard on their black sons. When you go to college, don't do this. I just wanted to reflect a little bit about how did I begin thinking about the subject of race and when did it become important to me? There was a great sense of pride in who I was because my teachers looked like me, which meant they talked about figures who looked like me, and they made education applicable to me. When I came to Madison, I was not reflected in the textbooks other than that slave unit. I was not reflected. There was no one black in that entire school. My first school, no one black. My second school, there's only one black teacher, and everybody said she was mean. Well, she was strong and from the South and came from an incredible family. I now know historically she was the school district's first black female teacher. But I was afraid of her by the time I got to her because all the white kids said she was mean. She had just been educated in the South and she believed in respect and no ma'am and yes ma'am and you don't talk back. And if she says get in a line, that's what you do. And if she says no talking, that's what you don't do. And so because she didn't play, folks thought that she was mean. So I was afraid of her, but I'm still in touch with her to this day. She supports my nonprofit work. When I have activities, she comes to it. But just one black teacher in my second school. In my middle school, there was more diversity. Thank God there was more diversity of black men and black women. I got my first black male teachers. My homeroom teacher was black, and my art teachers were black. I had two black art teachers, male art teachers. And then in high school, I never had a black teacher. My coach, my senior year of high school in track, was black, but I was never educated by a black person in high school. So I just wanted to just talk about the talk, and I want to ask, what was your introduction to the concept of race? And how did your family talk to you about it? And how did your friends start talking about it? Because it's a reality. How do you talk about it now? Do you opt not to until you see a person of color? Then you want to have that talk. How do you talk, or how will you talk to your children about race and the role of race? The talk about race, I'll be honest, it does erode at the innocence of a child. But walking in unprepared into a reality that was different from mine, and that's what happened in Madison, Wisconsin, 1970, when the total minority population was probably 2%. But mom couldn't afford to spare my feelings or my innocence by letting me walk into a scenario that would be destructive. And so, how will you embrace the talk? We want our children to be children as long as they can be. I still believe in Santa Claus when I had to have the race talk. I didn't know where babies came from when I had the race talk. The race talk predated the Santa talk, the Tooth Fairy talk, the Easter Bunny talk, and the sex talk. So I've been dealing with this and carrying this for most of my life. And even though I understand the angst that having that discussion with my mom must have caused, I'm grateful that she did not look into my little brown eyes and just say, he'll figure it out. She started boosting my confidence and helping me to know who I was. This is what parents have to do with children who are not part of the majority culture, because everyday life can just erode at that. But you know what? In the midst of it, We still thrive and survive. This is not a pitiful woe is me story. It's just thinking about how I first had the talk. My daughter's 24 years old and just graduated from her master's program in library and information services. But she started driving 8 years ago in high school, and I had to give her the talk. I'm so glad that each week I have this space to just talk about my life and my thoughts and my ideas and how I navigate predominantly white country while it's predominantly white. And I enjoy doing so because I think it helps my mental health. It certainly helps my stress levels. And it just feels good to voice what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking and to know that it matters to people. And so I ask a few things of you. Don't be selfish with this information. Tell people what you're listening to. Post it. Talk about it. Because it might help others to feel more comfortable having the talk, or to understand what the talk is, or to understand what their Black or Asian or Latino friends have experienced, Native American friends have experienced before they ever met you, that they were already prepared because they were given the talk. Make comments where you download the podcast or on social media. Let people know what you're getting out of it and what you're learning. Please subscribe at alexg.com. You can subscribe for the podcast, but you can go to my website and subscribe. I'm not selling you stuff on it. It just means every week you get an email saying that I dropped a new podcast, I wrote a new blog, I've got some new things going on, and you're always in the loop. And please click on the Patreon link. You can support us for as little as $2 a month. And so having your support helps us to continue to enhance the quality and the reach of this fantastic podcast. It's been my pleasure to be your podcast host and to talk with you about the talk. Have a great day.
Black like me. Black like.
This has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Special shout out to Eli and to Jeremy, who are my engineers and my editors on this, to Don Thornton, who is my podcast manager, who makes sure that we line all of this up, to Corey Saffold, who is responsible for that exciting new jingle, that Black Like Me jingle. I'm so excited about that. And to vocals by Marcus Fleming.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.
Black like me.